Welcome to the ninth, I think, episode of Shooting the Breeze with the Two Geezers. This time we're live on YouTube. So, well, canned on YouTube.
I'm not sure about live. Maybe two old geezers just slumbering onto YouTube and coming into the modern world of technology.
It's all a bit bewildering. By the way, nobody remarked on the joke about opening our Macs, the old Macs, the ones that came after the Sinclair Spectrum. And I'm really upset that people don't pick up jokes anymore. It's become it's so heavy. Anyway, this morning on the Trusty Evidence, we put out a post on the ONS, um, the Office UK's Office for National Statistics, which is another disaster, following on from the MHRA, the famous enablers disaster, and the UK Health Scare Agency. It's all a disaster zone. I'm afraid it's a bit depressing, but we'll pull faces now that we can that we're on the screen and we can cheer people up. The ONS post is just shows a disintegration of a once great organization. Professor Diamond has retired with immediate effect for health reasons. Presumably, he's just can't put up with the stress anymore. And apparently, very, very few people are turning up to work. So this is another consequence of the lockups, I'm sure. Most people will agree. The ONS, I got to tell the story of how we got interested in the ONS and the quality of the data. Uh, we go back to the peak of the COVID pandemic when we started looking at what a COVID death was, and we found 14 different definitions the United Kingdom used, different bits of the United Kingdom, different organization, using 14 different definitions of COVID death, death with COVID, death by COVID, death, I'm not sure. Perhaps the most bizarre one was the one where causation was assigned by a provider of the nursing home provider. So it could be an administrator, anyone. No one was doing PMs, and yet all this stuff made its way on the ONS website and on the ONS documents without any checks. And this really is quite concerning, is it not, Carl?
Yeah, so the Office for National Statistics produce a lot of data. They're being derided for it seems they have no idea what's really going on in the economy. But you're right, they do a lots of work around death certification and trying to be causation of death. But I wanted to point out in the article, in the pandemic, they received just a few quid short of 1 billion for the ONS infection survey. And as we showed is, can anybody point to a position where they say this changed the course of what happened next? That was 1 billion well spent. But one of the things they did within the infection survey is our friends, the UKHSA, did a review of the evidence of masks in the UK. And one of the issues here, I'm just with the moderns of technology, I'm just going to share my screen if that's okay. You hopefully can see that okay.
Wow,
Yeah.
wow, wow.
So the UKHSA review had 23 studies in it. All 23 had no mention of the protocol. All of them lacked binding of the researcher of the analysis. And actually, more than half, actually 12 papers, had a design which cannot answer a study question because they were cross-sectional. Were you wearing a mask? What happened that day? Two further studies were excluded. One because it didn't have an outcome, and then perhaps the most egregious example is they included a study that was in a predatory journal. But I wanted to come back to our friends, the Office ONS, and the one study they considered high quality was this analysis of population in the UK by risk of testing positive. And what they did is they said the conclusion was people who never wore a face covering in enclosed spaces were more likely to test positive for COVID-19 in the fortnight ending the 11th of September 2021. Now, as per usual,
2 weeks. Okay, last two
yeah.
weeks before 11th of September.
So I think in the era of trust the evidence, we read stuff and just don't trust anything. So what we did is go, let's get the original data, and we went back and got the original data, and this is what it looks like. Indeed, here is every 2 weeks they're asked doing a test and saying you test positive, you test negative, and then asking, did you wear a mask? Oh well, yes, more likely, less likely. And as you can see here in the figure, what we've done here is drawn the sort of line of no effect, where above it you're more likely is to test positive. Remember, it's not infectiousness, and below the line you're less likely. So if you can see here at certain periods, you're much less likely, which you'd expect by random chance. If you pick a 2 week period, it'll go up above and below the line. But hey ho, the good old robust Office for National Statistics, ONS, decided to pick this 2 week estimate and report this 2 week estimate. And this is a sort of nonsense that actually informs policy. And this particular strategy we call the cherry pick because you cherry pick the bit of data that suits your policy. And so, not only was the UKHSA review one of your favourite fens a big problem, the ONS took £1 billion to run an infection survey. And I have to say, we could do with that billion back, please.
It's easy, I think, for anyone who's looking for savings, real savings, to prune these organizations, get people back to work on a rational basis, and not try to present information to back up that position or that position or the other position or that decision, because this is what they've been doing throughout the last 5 years that we've been watching them, and a long time before that, in bits. But there's obviously a structural problem with all these governmental bodies, governmental agencies on health. I don't know about other disciplines. Now, the cherry picking thing is a classic bias. It's bias. It's bias, and it is immoral because they are trying to torture the data. They pick the stuff that they want because it backs up a decision which has already been made for political reasons. We know that that's the case because we know why masking was introduced. It was in the United Kingdom. It was introduced to please Nicola, i.e., the then First Minister of Scotland. So that was a political decision, nothing to do with evidence. So what we've got here is we've got ONS cherry picking the data, and then UKHSA not even probably realizing that they cherry pick the data, or maybe they don't even know the definition of bias. And really, from public bodies, this is simply not acceptable, especially since we've got a few million frozen pensioners to think about.
Well, you mentioned the fact we're short of money. I mean, you talk about the UKHSA. I mean, they've got thousands of employees. The ONS has got thousands of employees, and not one of them actually ask questions and go, let's look at the data, go and analyze the data. Now, you'd think in a society where money's running short, you'd be looking for areas where you could save money.
Yeah.
This week, we saw the COVID inquiry popped up in Module 7, which is looking at the test and tracing programs and isolating and the use of diagnostic tests. And, you know, it's over 2 years now since I was at the inquiry and got rubbished, but actually it's all calmed down a bit now. And you see now the effing and jeffing and the personal assaults have stopped. They keep inviting people who are being asked what I consider are questions out of their depth. And they're asked about diagnostic issues like false positives, the role of asymptomatics, for which we've produced systematic reviews on both topics. I've wrote articles early on in The Spectator trying to explain what a false positive is. In fact, it's everywhere in all testing. It exists unless you've got a perfect test with 100% specificity, which doesn't exist. And in doing so, you're always interested in the proportion of people who would test positive but won't have the disease. But importantly, I think we're seeing this disbanding of organisations. So one organisation that's about to be disbanded again is NHS England. We're seeing all these people jump ship. But actually, one of the organisations in the pandemic that was disbanded from your best mate, Matt Hancock, was Public Health England, who basically had this piece of work which was published in May 2020, which was
Very, very good. It's a very, very good piece of work.
understanding the cycle threshold in SARS-CoV-2 RT-PCR. And this graph is one of the most important graphs that I think you need to get your head around. What it shows is this is a relationship here between the timeline of detection of SARS-CoV-2 RNA in infection. And here what it shows is the relationship that this is supposed to reflect the amount of virus you've got on board, the viral load, and the relationship is its deterioration over time. So what you can see is number one is you can still test positive week 5, 6. That's the Florence three, the three young lads who were stuck in Florence for 60 days, obviously
That's
couldn't blow
right.
their nose, kept
That's right.
testing positive. We've done systematic review work that shows there's a relationship between the viral load and the proportion of people who test positive. And that has a relationship to something called the cycle threshold. So the test works by amplifying the amount of RNA in the sample. In doing so, the less you have in your sample, the harder the test has to work. In effect, that cycle threshold, when it gets to about 26, 27, that means that its test shows lights up positive. That means you have about 1 million copies per mil. And every free cycle threshold, so if you jump to 30, it drops from 1 million to about 100,000, 33, 10,000, 36, 37, you're into 1,000, 40, you're about to 100, 42, 43, 10. And by the time you get to a CT of 45, you've got 1 copy per mil. Despite that, we understood from FOI request that many organizations were using what they call a limit detection of a cycle threshold up to 45. And so many of them could be picking up people at week 6 or 8 who were still positive, but could have had an infection 2, 3 months ago. Could have been just contaminated because they'd walked in a nursery, walked through a care home, any place. It could have just, you pick up this RNA, which floats on particulate matter, is everywhere. So this bit of understanding is not just that you get false positives. You also have to count in at what point is somebody going to connect the dots and understand there's an issue here about infectiousness. You have viable viral virus and therefore can transmit versus you have fragments of RNA, which if you've been out in the garden today, you'll have probably plant virus RNA all over you. And that's a real issue with these tests. And the COVID inquiry rolls on. It's got more modules to come. It's going to take another 2 years to wrap up at least. And it's costing about £135,000 a day. And as I said, Tom and I could do at least a week's work at that rate and come up with some seriously good recommendations and then retire.
Okay, guys. So I'm just going to try and summarize the PCR for you. So what you've got to understand is that PCR is an incredibly sensitive test. What does that mean? It means that it will find almost certainly what you tell it to find. Okay. So a PCR positivity in itself is absolutely and completely meaningless, even in the absence of contamination, which is a very, very tall order. If you remember the long queues, all the drive-ins, all the people waving samples and waving swabs all over the place, contamination is a highly likely event, as Carl has explained. But even in the absence of that, one PCR on its own is meaningless. One positive PCR test for whatever bug you're looking for with a cycle threshold, with one cycle threshold reading is a little bit better. With several cycle threshold readings, therefore following the patient along during the development or the remission of the disease, then that's the ideal, because there is an inverse relationship between infectiousness, as Carl has explained, and the cycle threshold. The higher the cycle threshold, in China, they go on up until 40 and then 45 in some places. So everybody's going to be positive. So the higher the cycle threshold, the less likely you are to have a active disease. So a case is not a positive PCR uh, case, because a case in public health is an infectious case, is a person who has a viral load, active disease, high viral load, and is likely to infect a second or third person, and so on and so forth. I hope that's been explained. Let us know if there's a problem with that explanation. Have we put the world to rights yet?
I think we've covered enough for this episodes of Shooting the Breeze. We can go back now. You can go back now to your reclining chair and take a rest after all this energetic effort to explain PCR and cycle thresholds.
If people are wondering why I've got a red face, it's not that I've downed 3 bottles of whiskey before doing this recording. It's because I've been digging a Roman fort all morning under a really quite a strong sun. And that's why I got a red face and a red nose.
Well,
So,
look, it's trust the evidence here. Read our Substacks. All of these are available. It's goodbye from me.
and it's goodbye from him.